came through the Niagara River, or through the Ottawa River, through Lake Nipissing, and the Upper Peninsula was really explored prior to the Lower Peninsula because of those Iroquois Indians. They wouldn't let them through Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. But then Adrien Joliet, another French explorer, he rescued an Indian from some jail or prison up in St. Ignace, and this Indian befriended him. And the Indian said, I'll show you a better way to get back to Trois-Rivières up in Lake Ontario where their headquarters were. And he came down Lake Huron through the St. Clair River, through St. Clair, Lake St. Clair, and Lake Erie and Ontario. That was in 1666, 67. And at that time, LaSalle was there with a group, and he told him about this new route, and they thought they would take a chance with the Indians. And then LaSalle came with a boat called the Griffin, and it was full of supplies and explorers and adventurers and missionaries. And when they came through, the Detroit River was called Le Détroit, which means a waterway in French. They came through there, and when they came to our lake here, Lake St. Clair, there were no maps, of course, and they didn't have any name for it. It was a Feast of St. Clair. And with the missionaries being on board, they said some prayers and then made a dedication, and they named the lake Lac St. Clair. And over the years, people have tried to change that name to reflect the feminine gender, but it's never come to fruition. We haven't been able to do it, but that's really what it was named. And he would be the first, probably the first trader up through this area, through our area. Adrien Joliet going this way and LaSalle going back the other way. And it was 1701 before Detroit was founded. Cadillac founded Detroit. And
well, St. Clair Shores, I mean, going back was what? All farms, French farms?
Yes,
back in those
there were
days?
30.
Let's go back into that area.
Okay, there were 30 areas that Champlain doled out to French settlers, the few that they could get over here, and they settled mostly where the Milk River is today.
Was that right?
That's where the St. Clair Shores had its beginning, and it was called L'Anse Creuse, which means Little Bay. And that's where most of our ancestors came from, the Mason family, and the Trommelys and the Malaches, and all these French names that you've heard over the years. And it was just a settlement. They would use the waterways to go to Detroit to pick up supplies and sell their wares, their farm goods, and trees and lumber and so forth. And then it just came to a point where it was a village back in the turn of the century. It was St. Clair Shores was the largest incorporated village in the world. I think it was 8,000 people or something like that.
Was that right?
And it wasn't until 1940 there was about 12,000 people here. But in 1925 they had the election, and they voted for it to become a village from a township. And
what was the township name?
Well, it had several names. It started out was Orange Township, and then there was an influx of Irish settlers over here, and they didn't like that connotation of the orange, so they changed it to Erin Township. And then where the Ford Estate is today, along the Milk River, and there's about 30 residences and homes that opted to remain a township, and that's Lake Township, and it's still Lake Township today, as you know.
That's right, yeah.
It's a community within a community, actually. And then in 1928, they formed a police department, a fire department, and got things rolling and started moving ahead, subdividing streets and paving and lighting streets and so forth, and until 51 when they incorporated into a city.
Stopping there, who are some of the businesses that are still around going way back as far as you can? What are the oldest businesses that you can remember in the city?
Well, I'm not going to be accurate in this because I don't know that anyone has ever kept a record of it. And my recollection, of course, would start in the 30s, and then from what I've heard from older residents, Jack Bennett's Market at 10 Mile and Jefferson is one of the oldest, if not the oldest. Radke's Hardware that are still in existence.
Yeah.
Of course, there were hundreds of businesses that were in and out all along Jefferson Avenue. That was a great, great area for roadhouses, such as Blossom Heath and several others. But they've changed owners. Some of them burned down, and were torn down, and rebuilt, and moved, and changed over the years. We have probably 40 or not too much more than 40 businesses that are still within the same family, that have been handed down, that are still in operation. Richard's Automotive is another one that I can think of. I think that, Alcamo Hall, which is now Ron Joe's. I can't think of too many more offhand,
But they're some of the ones that go way back in the history of the city and are still in family ownership or have moved up to
Yes.
present day.
Yes.
What are some of the stories that went on at Blossom Heath, old Blossom Heath? You know, the one that we have today. That I know you've got some interesting stories to tell on that.
Well, yeah, that started off was Matt Kramer. Originally, Matt Kramer had a roadhouse or saloon or whatever you want to call it, where the Ford Estate is now, at the turn of the century. And then he moved up to where it is at the present time, and he built a roadhouse. And that was a place for people from Detroit to come out and have dinner and so forth. Well, my father and his family lived where the Ford Estate is now in Gawkler Point. And this was a great lake for ice boating, it always was. And my dad was an ice boat racer, and he would come from his house, and that was a bay in through there, and go over to Matt Kramer's saloon and leave my grandfather, Adolph, he'd drop him off, and he'd sit there and have a few beers, and my dad and my uncle and his buddies would run over to Canada and pick up some booze and bring it back. And then later, when the country went dry, that became what they call a Blenderschwein, in German, that's blind pig. And there's so many stories about that place and during those days, and I wouldn't know where to begin. There's of course, when the Volstead Act was repealed in 1933. Well, I was only 5 years old, so my recollection of what was going on would only be hearsay from older people. I wouldn't have personal knowledge at that time.
We know you're not that old, Gus.
No, not quite. But it was an interesting place, and it attracted all the important or big people from Detroit coming out for dinners. They had, and then of course, all these saloons along Jefferson that they used local help. All of us who were natives out here at one time or another worked at Jefferson Beach, the Lido, Blossom Heath, Edgewater Inn, which became the Beachcomber, which is now Elizabeth's on the Lake. All these places, and then we'd catch frogs and cut the legs off and sell them for frog legs, and so we were all being kept busy, in one way or another. My mother was cooking at the Lido, and I was cleaning up the place, and so forth. But Jefferson Beach, I think every kid in St. Clair Shores worked there at one time or another, working on the rides. And
well, tell us a little bit about Jefferson Beach. Now, Jefferson Beach was, I remember way back when. I remember when I was a lot younger than I am today. I used to take a bus out to come to Jefferson Beach. But Jefferson Beach was there for a lot of years. Which one had the biggest roller coaster? Didn't one of them have a roller coaster?
It was Jefferson Beach. I don't know if it was the biggest one. Jefferson Beach, Eastwood Park, and Edgewater. There were three of them. And some of the same people owned concessions in all three of them. I think Jefferson Beach started about 1928. And Wagner's have been involved in it, I think, practically since the start. They're the new owners. That was where people used to occupy their time, their free time. They would go to places like Bob Lowe, Put-in-Bay, and go for rides on boats out in the lake, and then they would come to places like Jefferson Beach. The bus stopped at Jefferson Beach. It was called the Jefferson Beach bus.
I remember that because
that's
the bus
where
I took.
the bus
Yeah,
turned around.
right.
And that's where people spent their time, and they, of course, they had big fireworks, and I lived at 9 Mile and Jefferson, so I could just look out my window. But it was a good place you had a lot of fun over there. I couldn't afford the rides, but it was a good place to go and pick up girls and, horse around. They had a swimming area in the back. Of course, I'd never pay. I'd sneak in through the back and crawl under the fence and go swimming.
Now the shoreline, when the old dance halls, the ballroom, that's down there, that's where the offices are now, right?
Yes, right.
That was the old ballroom. That was a pretty big operation there.
Yeah, that's a fantastic place. It's weird in a way when Jefferson Beach transformed into a marina. Should be called a boat harbor. Marina is Latin for sea, but at any rate, when they got into the marina business, they started storing boats up in the upper floor, and I took a police car across there, and you hear those old boards creaking, and it was spooky, but the way it was built, it was so strong that it was holding those big cabin cruisers up there. And we held one of our first police officers' ball in that ballroom.
Is that right?
And we had a big band in there. We made a few bucks that year and bought some life insurance for the guys and so forth.
When did that close down? What was it? You remember when that?
Well, in the late 40s and early 50s, there was a lot of public outcry about parks like that. East Detroit, Mildred Stark was the mayor over there, and she was putting the clamps on Eastwood Park. And we were, the neighbors around Jefferson Beach were upset with the people that were coming out there in the crowds and so forth. And there were 54, I believe, they had a tremendous fire over there. It started in the funhouse area where they had all the concessions and so forth. And it burned a lot of things. Fortunately, they were just getting into the boat business, and it didn't get onto the boats, but it pretty well destroyed the park, and that, I think, was probably the finish of it. And then they got fully into the boat harbor business, and that's where it's been ever since.
Gus, the shoreline, was a lot further in than it is today. Didn't the shoreline come up almost to where the ballroom was?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are various pictures that we have, and you can see where the beach keeps getting farther out and so forth. And well, see, the whole shoreline from the Milk River on up to probably Memorial Park was lapping right on Jefferson. And when I was a child,
is that right?
Yes, all along the lake, that's almost all landfill from Detroit. And of course, you can appreciate you're involved in that right now. These big trucks from Detroit, hauling the rubbish out of there, and they had these big gondolas, and they had wheels that only had rubber strips on them. They weren't pneumatic tires, and they couldn't come down Jefferson because Grosse Pointe prohibited that. Along with the buses, they had to make a detour and come up Mack and then down 9 Mile, and then back north on Jefferson again. And we lived 3 houses south of 9 Mile. And it would rattle the dishes right off the table with those heavy trucks coming out there. And where the Shore Club Towers is now, that was probably the first one, and down on Liberty, that was all landfill. And that's something I can remember because my mother would always forbid us to go to the dump. We'd get up in the morning and get dressed and head out the back door. She said, "Stay out of the dump." "Yeah, Ma, going in the woods." "Okay, that's fine." We'd go in the woods, cut back to the dump because there were so many things for a kid to do in the dump. Just breaking bottles and busting boxes and rolling tires and sailing discs out over the lake. It's just making a big mess of what we were doing. But all the way along, that whole thing was, there's some interesting pictures we just came by. It shows Miller Marina when it was first built in the 40s, and the Civic Center in the early 50s. And you could see one of the photographs, it was a sky shot. It shows a bulldozer pushing dump rubbish from a truck right in back of where the Civic Center is today.
Is that right?
Blossom Heath.
Well, let's draw a little picture for people. When we come from the Ford Estate coming north, what was the area along Jefferson Avenue? Today we have, going up by the Blue Gooseneck, we have a row of houses that the lake is right there. And as you come inland more by City Hall, the streets go down deeper in there. Before those houses were built, back several years ago, what was that all in there? What was that like?
Well, that was mostly all swamps and wetland. That's where we natives would fish and hunt, and we'd have our muskrat traps down there, and we ate the muskrat and we would sell the skin. That was a common thing. You get $1 a piece for a skin or $1.25. That was pretty decent money in those days. And we all had a night line. We ate off the lake. I think probably I've been arrested several times by the police department. That's why I had to join them, because but mostly it was for poaching. But I wasn't poaching to be stealing or anything. This was wild game, and we ate it. And we were poor, and so was everybody else. I mean, this was just a common thing. This wasn't like stealing or anything.
But prior to City Hall being built, there, how far did the water come up there?
Well, there was always a house down at the end. I remember Doc Rivard's mother lived down there when I first came on the police department. It was an old, small shell of a house, and it was down about where the park building is today. But then in between there, that was all low. That was swampy,
So pretty well the whole shoreline was swampy all the way
yes.
up.
When the water was high, we had water across Jefferson many times.
Was the west side of Jefferson swampy too?
Not too much. Not in my time. It may have been prior to that, but in my time, the streets up to about 10 Mile Road, Lang, Revere, and Ridgeway, and those streets, they were probably built after the turn of the century, up into the early 20s and 30s. But then from there on, it was just the Frazel farms and the various farmland and open fields.
Do you remember when it was all, there were farms out here and active farming going on?
Oh yes. Yeah.
You do?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. That was quite common. Along Harper and Little Mac, we have some aerial shots from 1935, 1940, and 1950, and I think they may be on display right now over
at
City Hall.
Yeah,
they're very interesting to look down and to see the vacancy. In the early 50s, everything just busted loose in St. Clair Shores. We started building new subdivisions. The police department was hiring 10, 12 people every year. I was the number 23. I was the 23rd policeman when I came on in 53. And then the next year we'd hire about 8 more, and then 13 more, and then 10 more, until we got up to about 101, I think, was our biggest strength. And everything was the same. Everything was under construction. Every street was being tore up or torn down, and new subdivisions going in all over the place.
Well, St. Clair Shores grew in one short period.
Yes. It was like overnight. Within about a 5-year period, I think the bulk of the people moved just out of the east side of Detroit and just moved right into St. Clair Shores. And many people will say, I've been out here 40, 50 years, and that's just about what it was when it...
So that there's been, I've talked to some of the old timers. Tom Welsh was on the show one day, and he was talking about when they said, you know where the Blue Goose came from? And I said, no. He said, Harson's Island. He said they floated the original piece of the Blue Goose over on a barge from Harson's Island. And that was interesting to know.
Yes.
That's where that thing originated.
Well, it's interesting to note, too, that the Blue Goose was owned by John Green, who owned our museum at one time.
Oh, is that right?
He had a store there. It was a grocery store. And how we came onto that, where I-94 was being built in 696 intersection, that house was sitting there, and Tony Ewert, who used to be our police chief, he and his wife live in an old log cabin, and they got noticing that thing, and they pried a board off the side and saw the big logs inside. So we were just getting started at the time. We were a loosely knit group with Ewert and myself and Madeline Reeder and Virginia McHarg, who was a librarian at the time. We just called ourselves the St. Clair Shores Historical Society. And we were interviewing older people, some of the pioneers out here, the old French families. And then we got into the house moving business, which was a tremendous undertaking. We didn't know, thankfully, we didn't know what we were getting into, or we probably never would have done it. We had a lot of grief from people that didn't want the thing in the neighborhood either at first, because it was, rather run down. But that's how that all came to be.
That's how you take it and put it where it is today.
As we moved it down there, we got a government grant, and then in that was about 74, 75. And then the bicentennial was coming along, and the city decided to form a historical commission, and they pretty well selected people who were already doing this type of work, and that's where we became well, we started off as a bicentennial commission, and then just rolled into a historical commission.
St. Clair Shores this year, and I know you've been working on some of that, and I think your group got out some small miniature newspapers on the history of St. Clair Shores. But we're 40 years old as a city this year, 1991.
Right.
Is that right?
Right.
And I know that you've assembled a bunch of pictures that kind of denote the history of St. Clair Shores. You got them on display where at the library, and you've got them on display at City Hall. And you sent out that little newsprint that was sent out to each house, kind of giving. That was a very good piece, incidentally.
Thank you.
We've heard a lot of good compliments on that.
It's a very comprehensive history. It's concise, but it's there.
Yeah, and but it's to think about when the farms were here. As I remember talking to you one day, you were telling me that the farms were narrow and long. They went all the way from where the other side of Harper, I guess, with a narrow strip all the way to the water, and that's how they had sectioned them off.
Yeah, they called them strip farms.
Strip farms, yeah.
The reason they did that, of course, is because there weren't roads, and the only access people had to bigger cities such as Detroit would be the water. So you would have a farm that you could. My mother tells about taking the cows down to the lake and watering them, and then they might take them all the way back up around Little Mac to pasture them.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the streets were named after local French families. 9 Mile was Defer. 10 Mile was Labadie, after the Labadie family.
Mm-hmm.
And 11 Mile, the name escapes me right now, but it was called Town Hall Road, but prior to being Town Hall, it was named after a lady who was later a school teacher. I can't think of the name offhand, but then 12 Mile was Champagne, and 13 Mile was Malash, and these were all named after local families who happened to have and of course Frazo was after the Frazo family. And there were many more, but and this whole area in the middle part of the city was all farmland, fields, full of wild game, full of pheasants.
It's hard to picture St. Clair Shores today of being that way because unless you were part of the city or the township or the village back in those days and have born here and raised out here. It's hard for everybody to picture as just what St. Clair Shores was like and all that's happened. And as you say, and we look at the history of the city, within 4 or 5 years, boom, it was built.
Yes.
And it just had a tremendous growth. And then I think we were way before Warren started to build. And then Warren came after us, and Warren started to build. Industry started going to Warren, and then Warren started putting up the same type of thing. Neighborhoods were blasting all over the place. Yes. But
we were the first one in Macomb County to really get going as far as building a city.
Well, Gus, it's we've got to get some more histories. It'd be nice if we could work up some kind of displays that we could show here on a show.
Oh,
some big displays or something that we could lay out. We'd have to work with Comcast to show the people some of the things. Yeah, some of the things that.
We do have available booklets called Muskrat Tales.
Tell them quickly about that because we got less than a minute to go here.
Okay, well, they're available at the library, and they're about $2.50 a piece, and they have little stories of the history of the city in various departments. To the breakfast table while the kids